Okay, hello Taiwan. Hello. Okay, so I'm giving a talk about 10 years of Rails deployment. Um, First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this conference. It has been amazing so far. So, and I heard there's barbecue and beer tonight, so excited about that as well. So, who here has used Capistrano to deploy their application? Okay, thank you. It's almost everyone, so I think my talk is done. Okay, so I'm doing a demo, but not of Capistrano, but like a um, simpler way to, for, to show deployment. So let me go to my terminal. Oops, okay, there you go. Um, sorry. Ta-da. Wait, okay, just wanna mirror this. Okay, so I didn't know that if I'll have internet access, so but um, I've decided, to show how maybe we could deploy a. Um, well, I didn't know if it was a Rails app, but yeah, I was looking at railspecific.com, and maybe I could deploy to their servers. So, like, no, railspecific.com. Okay, so are there organizers here? Like, can I have the password? Maybe 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, yeah, I'll try this. Okay, so I'm in. You guys update your bash? Okay, so let me. Okay, so okay, real specific. Just gonna check this. Whoa, yep, that's the right file. I'm just gonna say, okay, I know HTML, so don't do this. Okay, you've been hacked. Source, hack that PNG. Yeah, have to close it properly. Okay, so yeah, here's the site, and see if that works. Yeah. So yeah, don't try this at home. Okay, so yeah, we should, don't be evil. Okay, so we're back. Yeah, let's go back to my presentation. Oops. So, okay. Play. Right. So yeah, I've showed what I think is the basics of deployment. Like you need to get your code to the server, which is the first step. And well, before Rails, when I was doing web development, I used cPanel. So I'm not sure if you've heard about that. That was terrible. Like you upload your code using a web-based interface, and I I learned a few things and moved on to FTP. And I didn't know that it wasn't secure. So, but that's what people were using. So, uh, yeah, but it's a solved problem. Like we're already using a version control system to like when you're developing. So we should use that to get your code to the server. I mean, you could of course do what I did earlier and just type your just connect to the server and edit your code. And by the way, who has done that in production? Like, Yeah, I have and restarted the app. So yeah, but if your boss is here, don't tell him. So yeah, I mean, 10 years. In July 2004, Rails 0.5 was released. So yeah, this year is the 10th year that we've had Rails, and back then we had a few options for deploying Ruby web applications. We have Mod Ruby, CGI, FastCGI, WebRig. So Mod Ruby is an Apache module, so you could only use it with the Apache web server, and you could run your Ruby code inside the Apache process. So with just a few lines of config, you would be able to serve Ruby requests. So it was an easy way to start using Ruby on the web, but it had a few issues. Like you can't, for example, have more than one app on the server because for every Apache process, you would only have one Ruby interpreter. So if you have two apps, like one app can affect the other. Like in Ruby, it's easy to, for example, to redefine like the array class, and then the other app would be affected. So it was, if you control the server, then you could use it. Like so, make sure you're running only one app. And then CGI, it's a standard to run dynamic pages. So it was popular, like it's used by Perl, for example, or PHP. Like it's an easy way to run dynamic content. But the problem is you have to reload. The app is reloaded on every request. So can you imagine like having your Rails app like starting on every request? Like that would be slow and yeah. So it wasn't recommended to use CGI in production, but people were using it in development. Like so, if you remember dispatch.cgi back in previous versions of Rails, this is what that's for the CGI. So fast CGI is an improvement to CGI, wherein the process remains running, so there is no overhead. Like the so you won't have to start your application on every request. And in fact, this is the most viable option back in 2004. So Rails was extracted from a real application, like a live application. So it was extracted from Basecamp, and FastCGI was what they were using for a long time. Then we have WebRig. You're all familiar with it. If you run Rails server, then you'll get this server for development. So it's not really used in production because you could only process one request at a time. But for small load, yeah, it might work. So I found this, like I wasn't using Ruby in 2004, but I found this post in the mailing list written by a guy named David, so you probably might have heard of him. So this was in 2003, so actually before Rails was released. So I'm seeing memory consumption in the area of 30 to 35 megabytes per Apache process running Mod Ruby with a fairly smallish web app. So I'm not sure what this web app is, but it could be the beginning of Basecamp or what. But I'm surprised, like 30 to 35 megabytes per process. Like if Rails apps today use that memory, I'll probably be out of a job. So, and then someone replied and saying, yeah, that's a bit high. Like my processes are just 8 to 10 megabytes. So like 2003, right? So yeah, in 2006, it was a major development in the app server scene. So Mongrel was released. So after 2 years of people using Rails in production, Mongrel was released, and this is a separate app server. So unlike CGI and FastCGI, which is built into the web server, this is a separate process running, and it was Rails specific at first, but it was much faster than WebRig. So people use it in production. Unfortunately, back then Rails wasn't thread safe, and the common setup was to run a number of mongrels to provide the concurrency. So it's common to have for example, 3 mongrels running, and your web server would proxy to the 3 mongrels. So the problem with this setup is you have to write the config, right? I mean, your web server has to proxy, and then you have to write that config. But other than that, it has been a great improvement back then. So, and if you have 3 mongrels running, you also have to monitor those 3. So, like, there are a lot of moving parts when using mongrel. So in 2008, Thin was released. It's also a separate app server like mongrel. It uses event machine. It was faster than mongrel, but it wasn't significantly faster. Like we had customers who moved to Thin, but most were still using mongrel. So that didn't really change like the standard. There are some use cases wherein you want to use Thin, but most people still stayed with mongrels. And then out of nowhere, like these two guys, announced mod Rails, which became Passenger, and like they wanted, the simplicity of setting up PHP. Like if you used PHP, like it was easy, like upload a file and then it would show up on your browser. Like they wanted to have that simple configuration, and that's what they did. I mean, when I first heard about it, like I didn't believe it was possible. Like Rails has been out for 4 years by then, and no one has done it. So so Passenger was a big change. It was like having your own cluster of mongrels, but you didn't have to start them one by one. You didn't have to monitor all the Passenger workers. That they would be started by Passenger, and the proxy code, like you don't need to write that configuration. So Passenger became the new standard. The Rails core team has told people to use Passenger, and it was great. When it was announced, like I saw this comment, like, "Wow, if you guys pull this off, we will worship you." Like FastCGI is the spawn of the devil, and mongrel's the pain in the buttocks. So like this just shows how easy they made deployment is, but it's a bit unfair to mongrel because it really changed. Like back in 2006, like it really improved the deployment, the Rails deployment back then. So yeah, but it was really what people were looking for. And then if you remember, if you've used Rails with shared hosting, like you probably have a lot of issues because it probably didn't work. Like it didn't work well with FastCGI, and that's what Rails shared hosting like companies were using back then, like for PHP, for Perl, and like they can't use they can't support Rails because of that, because FastCGI wasn't really great for Rails like in a shared hosting like environment. So so Passenger was a big change as well. I mean, they've tried running mongrels, but like think about shared hosting, and like thousands of people are on one server, and then if you provide them with one mongrel each, right? So it would be using a lot of memory. So yeah, the other thing that that Passenger gave us is the global queue. Like we mentioned some. Like we heard one of the talks earlier, wherein you could have your request waiting for an available process, right? And Passenger just made this easy because it has this global queue, and your request gets processed by the next available Passenger worker. So it made things easier. So Unicorn was, well, so you think that like when Passenger was released that was that, right? I mean, but in 2009 Unicorn was released, and this is a standalone app server like mongrel, but it was different in that it has multiple workers like Passenger. So you only start the Unicorn master, and then it would start the workers for you. So you only have to manage one process, and then it would take care of the rest. So it also has global queue, which I talked about, and so that means that as long as there is an available worker, that your request would get process. Like, so you would think, why would Unicorn still need to be released? Like, Passenger made it easy, right? So when Passenger was released, it was only available for Apache. Like, so you were tied to using the Apache web server. So eventually they released an Nginx version, right? But yeah, at the beginning, like it was only Apache. And then Unicorn also supports this zero downtime deployment. Like you know that, so like you can't go down just because you want to deploy, right? I mean, before you could, maybe years ago, you could set up a time like during a weekend or the midnight that you could deploy your app. But now it's almost like it's almost a requirement that you be able to deploy your app any time you want. So Unicorn has this feature wherein when the workers are running and you want to deploy a new code, like you could start up the new worker before shutting down the old workers. So this is a diagram of a typical Mongrel setup and Unicorn setup. So this is from the GitHub blog. So you would see here, I'm not sure if this works. Anyway, you would see Nginx there that would receive the requests, and they would go to HA proxy, and then they would go to the Mongrels. So when I mentioned the problems on Mongrels, like it was solved by adding HA proxy in between the web server and the Mongrels. So what does HA proxy do? Like HA proxy you could set the maximum connections that your server could run, and people were setting it to 1. Like normally you would set that to a very high number. That's what HA proxy is. But with Mongrels, you set it to 1. And this actually uncovered bugs on HA proxy because no one else was using, a maximum connection of 1, just the crazy Mongrel users. Like so, like Ruby and Ruby users became popular with the HA proxy guys because there are a number of people, using HA proxy just for that. So what Unicorn did is what it made easier is to remove HA proxy and then use just the web server and Unicorn. So you would see that it uses a shared socket, which is the global queue. So they just use whatever's existing on your Linux server, and so that eliminates another moving part. So this became people moved to Unicorn specifically after especially when GitHub posted that blog about Unicorn. Like people wanted to try it, but Passenger is also a viable option then. So in 2011, like Puma was released. So like although 1.0 was released 2012. So what's different from Puma? So it's also a standalone server like Unicorn, but what's different is it could run multiple threads. So, but by this time, like Rails is already, you could set your app to be thread safe, and so you could have just one worker or 2 workers, and then you could have 16 threads, and the memory, so like you'll have 32 threads in all, but the memory would not be the same as 32 processes, so because you're using threads. So yeah, the problem has always been that you have to write all the config of this yourself. Like if you're using Puma for 5 apps, like you have to write the config for, like you have to run 5 Puma processes and then write the config. So yeah, in 2013 we still had new app servers. So we're not done yet. We might be seeing more app servers. So we have Passenger 4 was released, and this is a big improvement like over the previous versions. So if you're still using Passenger 3, like it's recommended to move to Passenger 4. And then Puma 2 was released, and what these 2 app servers have is having multiple workers and multiple threads. So if you're used to running Mongrels before, that's multiple processes. If you're using Puma before, like when it was Puma 1, it was 1 process and multiple threads. So now you could have multiple workers, so multiple processes and multiple threads. So so that's um, that's that's the current recommended way to run your Rails app. The only problem is you have to make sure that your app runs on um, runs with that your app is thread safe. So you have to make sure that it works. So if you're using Sidekick, for example, that uses multiple threads, so like you're sure that your app is working. So and Passenger 4, like it doesn't have actually multiple threads built in. Like you have to get the Enterprise edition, which you have to pay a license for. But it's really a good way to support the development of Passenger. So yeah. So yeah, well, I mean, which server should you use, right? I mean, like there's like that's like maybe that's like that's the question, and and you have to check if your app works like in the multi-threaded like setup. Then yeah, use Puma 2 or Passenger. Just try it, and if not, you could still use Passenger or you could use Unicorn. Like there are a lot of production apps using Passenger or Unicorn. So yeah. Yeah, what I didn't mention like on the timeline is JRuby. Like so JRuby made deployments easier, but with JRuby, of course, the caveat is you have to use the JVM. So if you don't have any problems using the JVM, if you could run it in production, then yeah, use it. Because it's a Java app, you could use any Java app server. So if you're familiar with Tomcat or JBoss, for example, you could use it. And then there are other options like, so Trinidad is a gem, so it's written in Ruby, but it has an embedded Tomcat in it. And then Torquebox is a popular one. It uses JBoss built in, but it has this built-in support for other things such as messaging and scheduling. So it's all in one, just not the app server. And then you could also use Puma, which is a Ruby gem, but you could use it with JRuby and Passenger as well. Yeah. Okay, so that's the app server. So yeah, we're going back to Capistrano, and we're not going into details on what it does or on how to run it, but like I like to encourage you to know what it really does. Like if you run cap deploy and you don't know what it's doing, like it's time to learn what it actually does. So like for me, the basics of deployment is to get the code and restart the app server, right? That could be at the basic of it, at the heart of it, that's what it's doing. And like if you know that, like then you could use any tools that could connect to the server and run commands. Like you're not restricted to using Capistrano. Then maybe you could use Ansible, which is a popular tool now to deploy your application. I mean, it's more popular for setting up servers, but if you know the steps, then maybe you could use Ansible for that. So yeah, and it's really like even if you just use cap deploy and then the other developer wrote the Capistrano script, it's good to know. It's good to know what it does, because if you might have to work at a place where you don't have access to the remote servers, and this is odd, I know, but like I've talked to a Rails developer who doesn't have access to like a remote access to the server. So he's working for a bank, so that's not really surprising, I guess. But like, can you guess how he deploys the app if he can't access the server remotely? So they use a technology called like a USB drive. Like so like when he has to deploy a code, like the people at the bank won't even look at his staging server, because that's not the real thing, right? So he has to give like the code in a USB drive and go to the to where the server is and give it to a guy who would review it for up to 3 days. Like, so he has to wait for the we'll call him a banker because he works at a bank. Like, he has to wait for the banker for 3 days, and then after that, like, he has to go back, get the USB drive, and plug it into the server, and then he has to deploy the app from there. And so when he's running, like when he's deploying the app and he's going to change to a directory like cd, change to a directory, then the banker, stands behind him over his shoulders and writes down what he's running, like cd, like then he'd say, oh, I could give you the copy of the screen after. Oh, no, it's okay. Like, so he has to do that. And I mean, if like I joke that the money is probably good. I mean, to stand that way of deploying. So, yeah. So yeah, next is like when I talk about deployments, like it assumes that Ruby is already installed on the server, right? So, but before that, when you get a blank server, like you don't have Ruby installed, and right. So yesterday I was at the chef workshop. So and they, like it was showed that you could set up your server from scratch, like using Chef, and that's good. The thing is, there are a lot of recipes available on the internet. There is Ansible playbooks that you could use. But again, I encourage you to know what it does. I mean, for example, like Ruby, like there are a lot of ways to install Ruby. Like you might have run a Chef recipe or an Ansible playbook, but how does it install Ruby? Like you should know, does it use the package manager? Like does it apt-get install, or does it install it from source, or use a Ruby version manager like RVM? So those things you should read up on and decide, instead of just copying what the other guy is doing. For all he's not doing that anymore. So you have to make that decision, and choose which one you want. So the other is like packages, for example. Who here installs the Ruby Racer gem? Okay, that's odd. Like, because like it's needed for assets precompilation, right? So like, but people don't probably know that they install it, and the first time, like if you don't have that gem, like your assets precompilation wouldn't work. So, and it requires you to have like a JavaScript runtime, like Node.js, or before SpiderMonkey, but it was deprecated. But that was hard because you need to install things, and I learned that developers don't like system administration. So if you find a solution on Google saying just install the Ruby Racer gem, things would start working, and like you'll be on your way, and I can't blame you for that. That it's really easy. But what it's doing is installing the Ruby Racer gem and the libv8 gem, which actually contains the binaries for Google V8, which is a JavaScript runtime. So now you're installing a package using Ruby gems, and that's fine. I mean, like it's easy, but there's a reason that package managers exist. So yeah, even in some places, like the Ruby Racer gem is not recommended. So yeah, and then the other packages, of course, like you'll have your database search and cache. Like you shouldn't depend on the Chef recipe that you see to determine the database that you're going to install. So it could be MySQL or Postgres. So yeah, so that's I think the current, like the most common deployment setups right now, and looking forward. I've like Docker has been popular, so won't go into details about Docker, but it made containers popular. Like container itself, like it has existed in Linux for a long time, and some people have been using it for a long time, but it's only now that it's getting popular. And like what I find interesting with people who have heard of Docker but not really use it is they don't know that you could have multiple OS inside the VM. So, for example, now if you're using, an Amazon EC2 instance or a VM from Linode or DigitalOcean, like you have your host OS, right? You probably have Ubuntu. But with containers, with that single VM, you could have multiple containers, and it could have its own OS. So you could have a host Ubuntu and then a CentOS or Gentoo like container. And what the advantage of that is you could now isolate everything down to the OS level, right? So if you have your code, running on one container, and you have to deploy your code again, like you could put your new code on a separate container, right? So that's not really appealing because you've just duplicated all your Ruby gems and stuff. But what if you want to upgrade Ruby, for example? Like instead of installing Ruby, the new Ruby version on your server, you could create another container with a new Ruby version. And then if you want to roll back, just delete that container. I've seen instances wherein like if you upgrade Ruby, and then you run into problems, then you downgrade Ruby, but then the problem's still there. Like so, like you're sure that it's caused by the Ruby upgrade, but downgrading it doesn't fix it. Like so, you can avoid that problem if you use a container. So yeah, and then there are other uses for that. Like if you're upgrading, from Memcache to Redis, for example, like you could spin up a new container. So that's just the like an overview of like I think what containers could play a role in deployment. So for more reading, like if you decide to like to do more complex deployments, like I've heard about Mamiya recently. Like there was a talk at Ruby Kaigi. Like they have like it was used by Cookpad, and they have like 150 servers, and Capistrano is slow. Like if I have like one or two servers, even 10 servers, then I don't think SSH is slow, like which is what Capistrano is doing. But so Mamiya is a new way of like doing the deploys, but on the heart of it, it's just connecting to the servers, getting the code, and then restarting the app. Like so, it uses a different technology to connect to the server. Instead of SSH, they use Surf, which uses Gossip protocol. So check this out if if you have 150 servers and your deploy is slow. So, and then you could deploy from S3. Like I've mentioned that Git or a repository is the way to get your code to the server, but maybe you could put it in S3 and then get from your server, get it from S3. Then that's possible. So yeah, and then Siebel example, like there's a playbook that Ryan Big here. Like so, if you have questions, ask him, not me. Uh, so yeah, there's an example. Like if you want to see what it does, like how to set up a Rails app, and again, just read on it, like see how it's installing Ruby, what web server it's using, what database it's using. You have so it's a good it's a good example on how to do it from Ansible. So yeah, thank you. I mean that's the end of the talk.